I am Rachel Humphrey with DEI Advisors. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering personal success in the hospitality industry. And I'm very excited today to welcome to the program Alexi Khajavi, President, Hospitality, Travel, and Wellness from Questex. Alexi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rachel. It's nice to be here.
Alexi, everybody knows that one of the things that I love about the hospitality industry is that there are so many paths to leadership, that not each person has to kind of look at a mold and follow that to get anywhere they want to in the industry. Tell our audience a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are, and maybe some of the pivotal moments along that path.
You know, I've always loved travel. It's been a part of my family, and so that was always ingrained in me. I studied anthropology at University of California. I had no intention of entering this sector or any other for that matter. But my first job out of college was working at a tour operator that was doing educational trips to Cuba. And then I was in San Francisco, and I started the .com boom was happening in the sort of mid to late 90s, and I joined a travel startup at that point that was called unexplored.com, and that was kind of it. It was like back-to-back jobs in the travel industry, and I was hooked. I've always really kind of worked in travel and hospitality. And so the journey from a sector perspective was set early because I love it. And you either kind of love it or you hate it, right? It's not for everybody. But I worked in hospitality, through college, sort of putting myself through college and even younger than that. And the journey to where I'm at now, I've worked overseas. I've worked in advertising agencies. I've worked in aviation. I've ran hotels in Central America. So I've sort of done it all, and I never thought that I would be in the business intelligence, industry in media and events, which I find myself now with Questex. But it really is almost a perfect culmination of everything I had done prior, which is certainly a bit of marketing, bit of sales, bit of content and research. And really just connecting through relationships and building, relationships through buyers and sellers, and connecting those buyers and sellers across the markets that I have the pride and the privilege of overseeing, which are great markets. I mean, hospitality, travel, and beauty and wellness are not bad markets to work in. So I'm very fortunate to be on the journey, but I don't think that there's an end to that journey. I think it is just a path that we continue to walk down, but I don't think you'll ever truly reach leadership, as it's called. But I'm happy to be on the journey.
Well, I love the idea that it's a culmination of all of those things as well, because if you pick pieces from each of your steps along the way, it leading to where you are today, that's such an important lesson of each of them being learning opportunities or development opportunities for you.
Yeah.
I like to share with our audience on each show the reason that I have asked someone to join us, because as people know, it is someone who has impacted my leadership, my personal life in a way that I think has really helped in my career. And you and I have had the opportunity to have some extraordinary conversations, or at least extraordinary, and from my standpoint, because you have such a great perspective. You look at things from, as a conference organizer, as you mentioned, an event planner, you look at things from the trade media standpoint. You have hands in, if you will, all of the segments across travel and hospitality. And so I've been very appreciative for the perspective that you share with me, the feedback you share with me that has helped develop a lot of my thinking on things that are important to me as well. And one of those, of course, is building a more diverse industry at the leadership level. From where you sit today, what do you think are some of the hurdles that we've been facing in the past, and where do you see things heading in the industry now?
It's a great question. The thing that I think nobody realizes about leadership, whether that be in an organization or in your career or within an industry, is that the risk of leadership is that you end up becoming more isolated. You potentially, less people are reporting to you. You have some trusted advisors or direct reports. You get dashboards. You get a set series of reporting and KPIs. And so, the information inputs are very structured, and they're very controlled. And so, which is great in a way, because you have your finger on the pulse of those important, whatever they be, right? KPIs or advisors or assets that you may be managing. But the risk of that is that your input of information is more controlled, and so therefore it's less spontaneous and it's less diverse.
Mm.
And the risk of that is that, we live in this world now where algorithms on our phones, on our internet searches, on our publications that we read, whether that's the New York Times or anything, is based off of what you read in the past, right? So it ends up doubling down and serving you the same types of content that you've engaged with in the past. So even your external sources of information are built to start to control and predict the type of information or content or research, whatever it might be, that you want. So in this leadership position, the risk is that you actually get less information than you were getting before. You're exposed to less diverse information. So I really think that the key to leadership is actually getting diverse sources of information and getting diversity of thinking, diversity of background, diversity of opinion. Because in leadership, as I said, you're really often most sort of served the information in a sort of built way. And the risk of that is that you're just doing what everybody else is doing. And where the opportunities most often lie is that, you zig whilst the others are zagging. And I think that a culture, a company, the curiosity, the desire to always learn at leadership is best served by having diversity around you, because the reality is that we do fall in like a record. The needle falls into the track and you just, the record goes around. You do want to get that diversity around you, because, people will bring you ideas or bring you thoughts or different perspectives that, frankly, we need to be challenged as leaders with. So, that has to be intentional. It's not easy. And it's something that we think a lot about, because, ultimately we are a marketing and communications agent, company, right? We provide information, we connect buyers and sellers. So we have to bring those different perspectives into our business so that we can in turn, share that with the sectors that we work in, whether it be hospitality, travel, wellness, pharmaceuticals, or whatever it might be. So, building a more diverse industry is a reflection of building a more diverse company, building a more diverse group of friends or advisors that can bring different perspectives. So, I think it starts with us. And then once you sort of see that, it becomes almost a little bit more second nature, that it isn't necessarily has to be, other than or separate than, but it's what you already do in your day to day by bringing in diverse or different perspectives. So I think it's something that is better done with us, within a culture, with yourself, within a culture, and then starting and looking at the industry and providing that opportunity for other perspectives to come in, because that's where the opportunities lie.
Well, and that's such a great way of thinking about it. I hadn't thought about it at all in the funnel of information, but that same funnel mirrors the pyramid of a lack of diversity. So you start off very diverse, and as you go up, it becomes less so. So if that is your funnel of information, but what a great way of looking at that. And I think, one of the things that's related to that when you talk about getting diversity of thought or diversity of an industry certainly is the role of conferences in that. As an industry, the hospitality industry, I would put up against any other industry as far as the importance of, and I'll say some of the reasons for me, of networking, of connecting with relationships I already have, of hearing different speakers, of staying, on top of trends and other things. Being in the conference planning and organizing business, you also, though, are in attendance at many that are not your own, or Questex's own. Talk a little bit about why or what role you think conferences play in the development of leaders in the industry, and some of the different reasons that people can think about attending and what they're ultimately going to get out of it. Not for a specific conference, but the idea as a whole of a.
Yeah, I mean, look, the sharing of information is critical to any industry. And communication is the most fundamental skill of a leader, right? So conferences bring those two together, right? Is it exposes you to other perspectives, but more importantly, it allows for you to communicate with others in the industry that are bringing those different perspectives. And communication is not just talking; it's listening as well. That's the key to communication. Is it's both input and output. So, from our perspective, to be able to bring professionals together around an industry, a sector like hospitality, one, it's just a great thing because it's an incredibly diverse industry. It's a complicated industry. You've got real estate, you've got the operators. So just from a sector perspective, it is an incredible, 2-3 days, whatever it might be. But I think the challenge for us as conference organizers is that we deliver what we focus on quality over quantity, right? So we try to bring the right people in the room together that can help drive the industry, explore trends, bring different perspectives, and ultimately, propel that industry forward. Seniority often comes with age, and in many industries comes with being, a white male, right? Particularly in certain sectors like real estate, which has always traditionally been dominated by men. So the challenge we have is how do we capture that seniority and at the same time open this up for other groups, young sort of students or emerging young leaders that are in the industry. So we've launched some things like around under 30s. Mentoring programs, or bring your top performing young leader in the organization, because if you don't give them a chance and you don't expose them, one, they'll never be given that opportunity, or that they're at risk of being never given that opportunity. But actually it's sort of self-serving, right? It's not a very good business model if your target audience is a 50-year-old white male. I mean, if that is your core audience, what are you going to be doing in 10 years, right? I mean, it's not very representative of society. So there's a bit of self-serving commercial, interest on our part to expose what we do, the conferences, to younger, more diverse professionals within the industry. I'd like to see us, and maybe this is a challenge to, my competitors, which, in this industry are all friends for the most part. I think the conferences should get together, all of us, and come up with a platform that is standard across all of them, that allows for a program for those that typically aren't given the opportunity to come, whether by cost or seniority, whatever the reasons is or are, and come up with something, right? Because for me to do it differently than the lodging conference does it, which is different than somebody else does it, doesn't make sense. And I think that we still have a lot of room for growth there to encourage some younger, more diverse professionals within the hospitality industry to attend all our conferences.
No, I think that that's great. And I hope that I am your first phone call when you start having those conversations.
You will be.
I want to pivot a little bit to some of the leadership lessons that you've learned along the way. You talked about living in other cultures, having different roles, whether it would be in the hotels at the property level, in trade media, in corporations. And taking risks tends to be a common trait we find with people who have reached their level of career satisfaction that they're looking for. What is your approach to risks? Are you an analyzer? Are you a gut instinct? Are you a support system talker? How do you really approach risks and decide which ones are worth it for you to take?
Yeah, great question. I've traditionally been more of an instinctual gut, type person. So if it feels like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or if it feels like it could be unique and it works, then I've gone for it in the past. I think in the last 15 years, however, I realized the impact of sometimes getting it wrong can certainly outweigh any potential reward. But there's jobs at stake, there's investments at stake. So I really do use two things to help me determine, is the risk worth or is the potential reward worth the risk? One is, I take an outside in approach. So I talk to customers, I talk to the market. I mean, there's nothing more important. An old boss of mine said, call your own number. When we used to have, business phones and not cell phones, but, be your own customer, understand how your system works, check in at your own front desk, try and change a reservation on your airline, whatever it may be, right? Walk in the shoes of your customer. And if you really sort of tap into that and you have your finger on the pulse of what the customer wants or needs or fears or, opportunities are, nine times out of 10, I think you've got a real strong chance of making it work, right? Because it's an outside-in approach. Too often, businesses say, well, I want to do this because it's better for my business. Well, if the customer doesn't care or won't pay for it or feels differently, well, then it will fail no matter how good the idea is. The other thing that I do is I really use my team and some very smart people that we have to model what we can. In fact, we just talked about something this morning about moving an event from one place to another, different city, different venue. That carries, and this is a massive event that we do, and it carries a lot of risk, right? And so you have to model that based off of some assumptions. And really, when you do that, the model, the data then can help you tell a story. But you have to be open to how that story is articulated, because data can say anything, right? You can make data tell any story you want it to. So that's where a team comes in, but it goes back to your other question, which is if you have a team of sycophants or everyone thinking the same way, well, then you're going to get the same answer. And that's not the point. The point is to challenge. The point is to bring different perspectives to that decision-making process. So when you do have a diverse team that you trust and that trusts each other, and you've got good data and you're taking an outside-in approach, meaning the customer really endorses whatever idea or whatever risk this may be, then I think that triangulation of those things gives you some ability to be more risky or to take bigger risks. And really, as the banker Nathan Rothschild said, fortunes are made not when the violins are playing in the ballroom, but when the cannonballs are falling in the harbor, right? And it's so true then, and it's true today. And that's why I think right now is a really exciting time to be in business, because it's a very choppy marketplace, right? There's a lot of good things out there, but there's a lot of challenging things that are happening at the same time. So, I think risk taking is frankly something that I actually enjoy, because it gives you an opportunity to kind of take a swing. And and I think taking a swing is why we do this, right? If all you want to do is do the same thing over and over again, well, you probably shouldn't work in hospitality, number one. But number two, that just feels very boring to me. And if it's boring to you, I think it's going to be boring to the customer. And again, you're not going to be as successful.
Well, great advice, certainly, to get a lot of different perspectives in there as well. Going back, we were talking about conference attendance and relationship building and networking. I want to turn this to your personal style. You and I likely network and build relationships very differently based on our own personal characteristics, but we have very similar networks. So how have you developed your networks? How have you built your relationships that you really think is tailored to your own personality?
I really like people, and I really let me be honest, I love this industry. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work in an industry that I love. And then I just admire so many of the people in this industry. I mean, I truly admire both the hospitality, but also the business acumen that they bring to it. So that makes it easier. I'm not sure I'd be as good of a networker if I worked in another industry, but here I am. I think you've got to, showing up is 80% of the battle. You got to be there. You have to be present. And I think that when you are, again, it shows others that you're there, but you also have to be accessible. And I think that's a true sort of skill that, again, it's made easier. It's a challenge on a work-life balance, because, so many of my business relationships, I would also call friendships, right? and we just spent 20 minutes sort of catching up and talking. That takes time, right? And so you've got to be accessible. I think also the more I've grown as a business person, but also as an individual, I think the more honest I am with myself, but also with my business relationships, right? So I think there's an authenticity there that also I think the pandemic kind of exposed a lot of that as well, right? We were talking how we all have, cats and dogs and, kitchens that weren't clean, or, kids coming back from school. Mine might be home any minute now because I'm working from home today. And I think that also has sort of allowed for the armor to come down. So for me, all those things have been helpful. But the biggest advice that I would give, and it's a challenge, I think, because I haven't had what I would call a mentor throughout my career. I've had moments where I've had a mentor, but it is something that I would say in the grander sort of scheme of things. Hospitality and travel. But I wish I had a mentor sometimes to be a little bit more, hey, I've gone through this before, or help give advice, or just some perspective, right? With a little bit of a little bit of maybe hindsight, behind them to impart some wisdom. But I think the biggest thing in this industry is to have those relationships. But the old saying, if you want a friend, be a friend. And I think that's the best advice that you can give in this industry.
Well, I love the combination both of being authentic and feeling like you're really building relationships, but also with mentors. Find someone who can help guide you. Find someone who maybe you can bounce ideas off of. You touched on work-life balance, but talking about the cats and the kids and the other things, and obviously I know you're a husband and a dad, but you travel a lot, and we have connected at times where you are jetting off to Europe and back in a very short window, and conferences and other things don't allow a lot of flexibility as far as when you go places or how long you're gone for. And work life can be way more than just parenting. It can be about self-care. It can be about hobbies. It can be about nonprofit work and other things. How do you think you do at managing the demands of the career with your personal life? And maybe how has that changed over time as you've learned different things?
Yeah, it is tough. And you talk about a journey. That is definitely a journey of which I don't think will ever end. I'll be honest, I struggle because I typically am a yes person. I'm an optimist. My vision of Alexi in the future is probably more optimistic than it is in the present. Meaning, of course I can do that. I can fly from Berlin to DC for an afternoon to meet with you, right? So I tend to sort of say yes first. It's my natural. And then as it gets closer, I realize, my gosh, how am I going to do all this? And then I'm struggling to sort of make it all stitched together nicely. So it is tough. And I've realized that about myself, that I overschedule myself simply because I do say yes a lot. What somebody told me, and I think it's really good advice, is when you say no, you're actually saying yes to something else. And so I try and keep that in my head when someone asks me to do something, attend something, partake in something. I try to think about, if I say yes to this, then on the adverse, what am I saying no to? And that has helped me a bit, where oftentimes if I just take 10 minutes or a day to respond, it gives me a little bit of that breathing opportunity, and also looking at the calendar and where I'm going to be, to really say yes and mean yes. Because there's nothing worse than saying yes and then having to change it. Right. And I end up doing that a lot. Some of it's just natural because I'm very busy. But I think I can do a better job of it. The second thing that I think is really interesting, though, is that, the 2 years of the pandemic, when we were in lockdown, we were living in London at the time. So there was really heavy lockdowns there. That was an incredible time for me because I didn't travel for 18 months. It was probably the only time in my life. in my adult life that I haven't traveled. And I spent so much time with my family. I mean, every day. And I don't think I ever would have gotten that if the pandemic wouldn't have happened. Pandemic was awful. I'm not endorsing it in any way, but from a personal perspective, and I'm very fortunate, the amount of time that I spent with my family was just second to none. That being said, I think my wife was keen for me to hit the road again.
She was ready for an end.
I'm not sure she would echo my sentiment. But
when the airport reopened, she was first in line online.
Yeah, I got an email. I was like, I don't recall booking this trip. But I think that's also, there is something about quality over quantity. Because when I'm gone and then I come home, I really do try to partake in everything I can and really not miss, the big things. Whereas, no offense, but I have friends that don't travel, but they're home every night. And so they don't necessarily, I think, have the same perspective of how important this could be. So, that quality over quantity is a better metric for me. But also, what I try to do is, as I said, is I try to give myself just a little bit of pause before I say yes, because my natural answer, and I probably shouldn't say this to all of people listening, my natural answer is yes, sure, I could do that.
The next time you say yes, you're going to get the follow-up questions of, are you sure this is a yes?
I
love the idea of being present when you're present. I think that is something that I think a lot of us came out of the pandemic with, is it is less about how often you are present, but when you are present, are you really locked in to being there?
Yes.
No leader rises through their career without some setbacks, some of them of different proportions. Overcoming obstacles is a really important skill in managing either the unexpected or, in some cases, an abject failure in a risk that was taken, or even one that you didn't see coming. What is your approach to overcoming obstacles in the face of something either that didn't work out like you thought it would, a difficult situation with an employee, a company decision that didn't pan out? How do you really tackle overcoming those challenges?
Well, part of it does come back to my optimism. I am an optimist. Again, I will default to that. So that helps in overcoming the obstacles. I'll tell you though, there's been a few times in my career where, I do tend to think highly of my ability to navigate out of challenges, or perhaps sort of avoid risky situations by some miracle, or self-worth. The agency that I invested in when I came back from Central America, I'd always wanted to be in the advertising world. My uncle, who I was very close to, was in ran an advertising agency in San Francisco, and I thought that I could change the business of advertising, of creative agencies. And how foolish is that, right? I say that with absolute conviction that is a foolish assessment and belief. I probably was watching too much Mad Men at the time. But I thought that I could streamline, the entire account management sort of tranche of an agency, right? You've got the biz dev folks, you've got the creative folks, and then you have this account management in the middle that, basically facilitates the client relationships and all the work that you do. And it's a really expensive piece because it means they've got to basically touch all the work. So you're just adding layer upon layer. And it really is what takes a chunk of an advertising agency's profits away. And I thought I could streamline it, or even in some cases eliminate it. And it was, it nearly put the agency on its knees. And it really put me in a very difficult position, because I was working with a lot of people that had always worked in advertising or always worked in creative agencies. And I hadn't, right? I had brought this, and I'd worked in aviation and hospitality before. So the whole point is I did it there, we did it there. And so we eliminated this level of customer service, and it was better, right? Because people could use their phones to check in and so forth. It was a terrible idea. And I really, as we talked about earlier, I failed to recognize that my decisions were not bulletproof, but also had knock-on effects on other people. And so, that's where I think, again, making some team decisions and thinking about the knock-on effects, how your decision affects something else, which affects something else, which affects other people ultimately. And so, that for me was a big lesson, and I really got knocked down. In fact, I got out of the the creative agency world from that, and it was really kind of a humiliating moment for me, where I really kind of almost put people out of work just based off of my decision alone or my belief alone. So I think from that perspective, without that, I probably would have still been going along my merry way, thinking many of my ideas were bulletproof. So in fact, I know this about myself. The only way I really, really learn is by getting punched in the mouth. I mean, it's really the best way for me to learn. And it's really kind of, it's almost tribal, right? I mean, it's why fire is hot. It's why, pain, falling down hurts, right? And that is the same in business is sometimes you just have to get punched in the mouth. And what that's allowed me to do moving on is to, I think, be a better person in terms of decision-making. But it hasn't made me more risk averse. And I think that it's that balance that still, I think, gets me up in the morning. But it brings other people along with me on the journey. And that's really critical, right? Because this sort of like unilateral decision-making that I did earlier in my career, one, I didn't bring people along with me on the journey. So I had no one saying that's a really bad idea or let's try it differently. And honestly, that taught me so many lessons that I hold today. And I think it's made me a better person, a better colleague, and a better businessman.
That's such great advice. And I appreciate your sharing, because certainly that self-reflection on what led to that challenge and how it played out is really an important lesson for people to see. Well, that I could sit with you for days on end. I could talk forever, and love to hear what you have to offer. I want to turn just to two kind of rapid fire ones. But as we sit here today, advice to our younger selves, I think, is such a critical part of our journey, because we get to reflect and we are all works in progress. We get to grow. What would Alexi today tell that anthropology major about how things played out for you? Or what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just because you think it's funny doesn't mean everybody else does. I mean, honestly,
Okay.
I really should have thought more before opening my mouth when I was younger. I mean, I really did think I kind of had a lot of answers, and it was partly because I was well traveled. I got some great opportunities to be in some really exciting companies that were startup companies or were small companies, and so I was always kind of at the table at a very young age. But that kind of made me think that I was there for a reason. It wasn't just the structure or the size of the company I was at. So my advice to my younger self would be, sometimes put your hand down, young soldier. There's someone probably smarter, wiser, more capable of answering this question than you are. You'll get your turn.
I love that so much. Well, closing out today, the motto of DEI Advisors is to empower personal success. What is one final tidbit you would offer to our audience on something just about your leadership or something that you've learned that you have found really impactful in your journey?
Honestly, it's really get to know, respect, and admire the strengths and the weaknesses of the people you work with. We all bring special experience, skills, but also challenges to the table. You never know when somebody is having, a particularly difficult day, and you never know what's going on in their personal lives. So, have a little bit more compassion and patience in allowing for the workplace, I think, to be a healthy place to, if somebody desires, to bring some of those issues. It's not going to make your company less productive, less effective. There's ways to do it professionally. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that in the next decades. I hope we are. I hope we can become a bit more compassionate, because I do think that people spend so much time at work and trying to achieve that work-life balance, that to have, professional me and personal me as two separate individuals with two completely separate, set of values and friends and networks, that's impossible. So I think this blurring of the lines is already happening. And I think businesses and company cultures would best be served to open themselves up to it and embrace it, and welcome all personalities and all, thoughts and perspectives to the table, because it does make us more richer and more diverse. So that's the 2 cents I would contribute.
Well, Alexi, on behalf of myself, on behalf of the hospitality industry, thank you very much for your leadership, for your continued commitment to a more diverse industry at all levels. For our audience, thank you for tuning in. And if you liked what you heard today, we hope you'll head on over to deiadvisors.org, where you can hear from other exceptional hospitality industry leaders. You can also stream the DEI Advisors podcasts on any of your favorite streaming channels. But Alexi, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts.
Rachel, thank you.